Welcome to the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey. Remember that this year our focus is on one powerful theme: identity and influence. Because you can't influence what you haven't first identified, both in yourself and in others. Quick pause before we dive in. Remember that if you're serious about growing your influence, just make sure that you are following the show and subscribe to our newsletter so that you never miss an episode or an insight. I'm Scott, and as always, I'm here with our go-to leadership guru, leadership expert, our leadership just dogma leader, Dr. Michael David Morales, aka Mo.
What's up, Scotty? Thanks for that intro, man. I'm always ready for your intro, so let's hear that story.
Absolutely. So I went to one of your favorite topics of the day, and that is fantasy. But today we are talking about emotional adaptability. And just remember that emotional adaptability is the difference really between reacting to a pressure and leading through it. And I think, in my personal expertise and opinion, that few stories illustrate that contrast more powerfully than the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. So in that story, and whether you've read the story or seen the film, but Gondor, or the Kingdom of Gondor, the city of Gondor, the city of Minas Tirith, is under siege, and the city is burning. The enemy is at the gates. In the middle of all that chaos, there are two different leaders that face the exact same crisis, but they ultimately respond in two very, very different ways. Denethor, who is the steward of Gondor, because Gondor currently does not have a king at that time, collapses inward. He becomes consumed with despair. He is convinced that defeat is just absolutely inevitable. His fear just narrows his thinking. He isolates himself. He lashes out and just makes catastrophic decisions because he just cannot separate what he feels from how he leads. The pressure doesn't just test him, it overtakes him. Now, contrast that with Aragorn, who is kind of our fearless leader who has kind of risen from the Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in the series, until now. He sees the exact same battlefield. He understands the exact same odds. He's looking out on the exact same enemy. He feels the weight of what could be lost from this battle, but instead of spiraling, he steadies himself and then steadies the others around him. And before the final battle, he even tells his men, do not say, do not weep, for not all tears are evil. He acknowledges the grief without surrendering to it. He recognizes fear without amplifying it and regulates first, then he rallies. So it's the same exact siege, the same stakes, but two very different emotional responses. And that's really the heart of emotional adaptability. So not the absence of stress, not the ability to but the ability to recognize what you're feeling, regulate it, and choose your response with intention. Because when pressure rises, leadership isn't about what you feel, but it's about what you do with it. And that's really kind of what we're getting into and what we're talking about today. So emotions run high all the time. Work and life and every situation can't be without stress. And as leaders, we have to know how to navigate that. So Mo, I know we've got two great points that we're going to talk about today. So Mo, why don't you just take us away?
Yeah, great story. So first point today, when talking about this entire subject about emotional adaptability is this, leaders. You need to distinguish emotional rigidity versus emotional agility. So the core idea that we want you to get here is that rigidity reacts, agility responds. Scott talked about two people in the same situation, similarly, same situation, and there was two different responses. So do you react, leaders, or do you respond? And thinking about it this way, emotional rigidity it really has some predictable defaults. So my question for most leaders is, how do you default emotionally under pressure? Do you default to anger, which is loss of control usually? Do you withdraw, which is self-protection? Do you over-explain? That really speaks to our insecurity. Or maybe you are defensive, and that's usually something to do with wanting to protect the ego. So Scotty P, let me put you on the spot right here. How do you default emotionally under pressure?
Yeah, so I tend to hyper focus under pressure. So I tend to zero in, almost get tunnel vision, if you will. So I tend to hyper focus on whatever task I need to accomplish at hand. So blur out everything around and kind of focus on, what do I need to do to accomplish the task at hand? What do I need to do to accomplish it to the highest level?
Yeah. So in the Army, I've watched leaders for years who are tactically brilliant, but they lose influence because when they feel challenged, their voice changes and they get a little bit defensive, and you can see the temperature shift in the room. And so nothing strategic changed, but psychologically, everything did. And those are the leaders that react. The leaders that respond always take everything in. They listen to everybody's point of view, and then they make a decision. So leaders, we want you to be the kind of people who listen to your team, take it in, and understand my team is just trying to help me. We're all looking for the same goal, which is a win. And if you can bring your team into the process, that's going to help your emotional state. It's going to help the emotional state of your team. The second sub point of this, Scotty, would be that suppression is not strength. Okay. So there's a difference between composure and compression. Compressed emotion eventually leaks, right? If you are pressing everything down and keeping everything away, your team is going to feel it. They're going to feel where the tensions are. You cannot fool your team. I say it all the time. You might be able to fool your bosses. You might even be able to fool the people that are far away underneath you. But those who directly report to you, they know you. You're not that good unless you're some kind of secret agent that knows how to, manipulate minds and stuff, which none of us are. We're just trying to do the best that we can. And so there's a stat from Harvard Health. I mean, I love the Harvard Business Review, everything about Harvard, and it shows that emotional suppression increases psychological stress. And not only that, it decreases memory performance because now you're focusing your energy on other things. So in other words, leaders who suppress, they don't become stronger, they become less clear. And Scotty, here we're all about clarity.
That clarity is something that is key, but sometimes is missed 100%. And so it's definitely something that is missed a lot of the time, especially when emotions rise. I feel like emotions can definitely cloud that clarity.
Yeah. And can I say this? So when we're talking about emotional agility, Susan David writes a lot about this, and she defines emotional agility as this. And I want to read this quote here. It is, where are you? Here she is. The ability to be with your thoughts and feelings in a way that allows you to choose your response. Leaders, are you acting in such a way that you are setting yourself up to choose your response? Or do you just react in the moment and just start responding because you just need to put some fires out? What she says here is powerful. And I want you to think about this, leaders. You are not your emotion. You are not your thought. You are the chooser of your response. So today, choose the correct response.
I really like that. And I feel like that's such an important thing. I feel like so often we look back on certain situations like, man, I wish I would have responded different in that situation. And it's almost that regret when we look back on certain situations. And it's almost that debrief in a way where we debrief ourselves and we look at a situation and we go, man, that probably would have gone so much differently if I would have responded differently. And so then the question is, why don't we? Why don't we? And I feel like that kind of brings us a little bit into our second point for the day, because I know you're going to get a little bit into the science a little bit. I mean, we're not going to go heavy because let's face it, we are not neurologists on this podcast here. So, but Mo, why don't you kind of take us into that second point for today, since we're going to kind of hit that a little bit.
Yeah, great lead into that second point. It's this, why does adaptability collapse, and how to regulate under stress? That's what I want to talk about. And leaders, why does your adaptability collapse? It has to do with stress, because stress shrinks perspective and speeds up reaction. It makes everything go faster because all of a sudden you feel like you're behind. If you've ever been in a situation where all of a sudden the pit in your stomach just drops and you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, and so you just start scrambling. And sometimes you say the wrong thing. And so, explained simply, it's this. Daniel Goleman actually talks about this in one of our books of the month. He talks about the amygdala, and the amygdala within us scans for the threat. It doesn't distinguish between a lion coming at us full speed in real life or an email that's sitting on our screen. But when triggered, the blood flow shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, and you literally lose executive function. Isn't that crazy? Because now you're in a moment of stress. You may have felt this if something happens and all of a sudden your body just kind of gets hotter and you start to sweat and you're thinking, what just happened? What Daniel Goleman talks about. That's what happened. Stress hormones, like cortisol, can remain elevated for hours. Can you believe that? One stressful moment, Scotty P, can make it so that the stress hormones in us are just going to stay up and triggered for hours. And what does this do? It impacts judgment. It impacts tone. And you might think, well, I dealt with that stressful situation when I was in this meeting. but it's an hour or two later. Now I got to go back into the office with the rest of my team. You're still being effective, or you're still being affected. And so leaders, people can feel that. If you've ever been in a situation with your boss and all of a sudden you think, I don't know, he's just off today. She's off today. Like, I feel like it's a little bit more on edge. That's what you're seeing. You're dealing with all of their stuff. And so leaders,
Mm.
I'm telling you, you don't want your people to deal with all your stuff. You should have people, men and women in your life who deal with that stuff, but your people, they do not deserve that. So you need to be able to regulate your stress and know how to work under pressure, which brings me to the pressure piece, Scotty P. Under pressure, we revert. What do I mean by that? Stress doesn't create new behavior. It reveals the old patterns within us. So unless you've learned something, you're going to revert back to how you know. So childhood coping starts to show up, and I don't want to get way too in, way into into childhood trauma, but since I did go to school and I've got degrees and all this stuff, let me use it because I spent a lot of money on it. But I'll break it down this way. When you're a kid, and I'm talking about boys for the most part right here, there's the kid who always had to fight. There's the kid who always had to stay invisible. And then there was the kid who always had to be perfect, right? Now that's simplifying it, but we were either in contact with those people growing up, or we were one of those people. And most likely one of those three. Did you fight, stay invisible, or tend to try to be perfect? Which one were you? But now you're in charge. Now you're in charge of one person or an entire cubicle of people. You're a CEO. Maybe you're a chaplain like me in the Army. Maybe you're the owner of your own business. But Scotty P, it's the same nervous system. That hasn't changed in us.
Mm.
So that's the deep identity work. And so leaders for 2026, adaptability in the things that you do and the way that you respond, that's what you have to figure out this year.
So counseling might be a great solution for our leaders. So
Yeah. Always,
no,
always break it down.
always though. But for real, gosh, it's some of those learned behaviors from childhood are hard to break, I will say. So for sure. So then Mo,
Yeah. And
yeah, go
so
ahead.
before we move on, one reactive moment can undo months of what you've put into your team.
Mm.
Months of the trust that you built up. I've seen leaders spend 6 months, like I've worked with them, and they've spent 6 months on building trust within their team, and then one hallway explosion resets everything. One outburst, one failure of emotional intelligence. And then all of a sudden they're back to square one. And sometimes Scotty P even puts them into the negative. We talk a lot about having an emotional bank, a relational bank, if you will, meaning everything you do with your people, you're either investing into that relational bank or you're withdrawing. You're going to have to withdraw. You're going to have to withdraw. There's going to be a tough situation where you have to call somebody out, or you are going to have to call yourself out or be called out for messing up the books or whatever it is. But if you have enough relational dollars in that bank, it's not going to bankrupt the relationship that you've built with that person or people. When you have these outbursts, when something messes up, when you are building culture and then all of a sudden you screw up, that reactive moment, leaders, can really mess you up. So what we're trying to help you do is to start thinking about, when are the moments that I react? Because there are a ton of studies that show in organizational psychology. I mean, these people study this stuff, and negative interactions have greater weight than positive ones. Meaning, if something good happens, great, it helps lift the boat a little bit. But if you have a negative run-in with somebody or an interaction with a person or people, that brings it way down. So
Mm.
leaders, what are you doing to have more positive interactions? Because leaders underestimate the compounding cost of a reactive outburst. So don't do that. Do not get caught in that trap.
Mm. So then, if we're thinking about that, then I mean that's a big deal, and that in itself, right? That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
It's
it
not like,
is.
oh, okay, there's my freebie. I won't do it again, sort of thing. That's a lot of pressure for our leaders. So then, what can our leaders really do to stay emotionally steady? Like, what are some of those things that we can do, whether it's a daily practice or whether it's a weekly practice or hourly or whatever it may be? What are some things that we can kind of do to just stay emotionally steady?
Great question. And I don't think enough leaders ask that question. So, really, the question you're asking, Scotty, is how do I regulate? What's the practical depth for me? That's what I hear when a leader comes to me and asks that question. And so, you have to first, and I'll take you through these really fast, you have to identify the trigger. And so, you can say, to one of your people or even yourself, if you don't know your triggers, then your triggers own you because you don't see them coming, right? Because those triggers can come in ways of being publicly challenged, when you feel ignored, when you lose control, when there's time pressures, if you feel like somebody's being disrespectful to you. Those are all those triggers. Leaders, what are your triggers? Because then you have to identify the belief behind it. What do I mean by that? When you hear things like, well, and these are things you say in your head. Well, my team should trust me. Or they say something, they ask something, and you're saying to yourself, they already know this. Or you might be thinking in your head, why are these people questioning my authority? Right? Because those beliefs, they're going to fuel the emotion. And then what you need to do is identify the fear. Like, why do you have these fears? Right? This leaders is the leadership gold, as John Maxwell would say, because most leadership reactivity comes from some kind of fear. So if you know your fears, right? If you go to counseling, one question you should always ask is, hey, can you help me figure out my fears? And I'm talking about going all the way back to childhood, right? Because most leadership, you're going to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of us leaders, do you deal with one of these things? Do you fear losing authority? Do you fear being exposed? Do you fear incompetence? Or do you fear being irrelevant? Just those four, starting right there. Rewind this, listen to those again and say, do I deal with these? Strong leaders are not the ones without fear. They're the ones that can name those fears and then they can deal with them. And so once you do that, leaders, you can kind of go into a tactical pause. You like that, Scotty P? Tactical pause, Jocko Willink. I was trying to throw a Jocko.
It's a TP.
Yeah, there you go. The tactical pause. Slow down. Don't make a decision when you're emotional. This will help your posture both physically and emotionally. Count to 10. Step away. Take a drink of water. Don't make a decision when you're when you're running hot. And what this is going to do, leaders, it's gonna repair. And when you repair something, it really requires ownership. So if you have to explain why you reacted, you're not repairing, you're defending. So stop defending yourself. Just come out and say it. And leaders, I know you're going to hate hearing this, but that's why we have the podcast. You need to start saying things like, man, I handled that poorly. Or, well, the tone that I just used in this context with you, that wasn't helpful. Or if sometimes you just need to stop and just say, man, I just got to reset. Can I reset this and can we start all over? And so just remember that leaders who apologize appropriately, they're actually going to increase credibility. And when things go bad and you have to take out of the relational bank, that's how you start to repair.
I love that. I love that. So Mo, before we kind of sign off for today, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, just one. Leaders, remember that emotional adaptability is the difference between being respected for your position and trusted for your presence. If you want to become a level 5 leader, and Scotty, I've told you before, I only know I know one, maybe 2 level 5 leaders personally, and I know a lot of leaders. But they are trusted for their presence. It doesn't matter where they are or what they're doing. These people are trusted because they are there. That's the kind of leader that you want to be. But that takes years to make happen. And so if you want to be a leader who makes a difference for the people that you are leading right now, start being present where they are and throw your position out the window. We all know those leaders. They walk in the room and it's like, well, I'm the most important person here. And that's already not good. But it's the great leaders who walk in and they're not worried about who they are in terms of their position. They already know they have that. They're trying to lead from their presence. And those are the great leaders. So leaders, be a great leader, be a leader of presence, and watch your whole team change.
Great closing there. So I appreciate you all spending part of your day with us. So remember that emotional adaptability isn't optional for leaders, it's foundational. And that the leaders who rise are not the ones who never feel emotion. They're the ones who regulate it. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, please rate, review, and subscribe. Remember that it truly helps other people discover the show. And it's important as part of your leadership journey to discover and listen to the show. And remember to swing by our website, rtclc.com, join our monthly newsletter for exclusive tips and a deeper insight to what you won't hear on the podcast. And until next time, lead with purpose, stay authentic, and make an impact.